Chapter 17. Just as Rowdy and I started for Grandpa's store, Daisy yelled, "Jay Barry, if you're going to be running, you'd better be careful. You might lose your money." This scared me. Daisy was right. I ran my hand down in my pocket and took a firm grip on my money before I started running. I learned on that trip that it's not easy to run for 3 miles with one hand in your pocket, but I did it. Grandpa must have been looking for me, because he was standing in the doorway when I came puffing up. "When I saw you coming, I thought you had lost an arm," he said. "I couldn't see but one." "I was afraid I might lose my money, Grandpa," I said, grinning, so I held on to it all the way. "Oh, I see," Grandpa said. As we walked into the store, I said, "Did you get those ponies, Grandpa?" They're out in the barn lot," he said. "2 of them, a roan, gelding, and a paint mare. They've been broken, and they're gentle." As I stood there looking at my old grandpa, I had a feeling that something was bothering him. He just wasn't acting natural. He was too serious. He didn't seem to be the least bit excited about the ponies. Thinking maybe I was just imagining things, I asked, "Grandpa, how much is the pony going to cost me?" "He wants $100 for the roan," Grandpa said, "and $75 for the paint. That's what that Indian wanted when I got there, and that's what he still wanted when I left. I've sworn 100 times that I wouldn't deal with that Cherokee anymore, and I mean it this time." I couldn't help grinning, for I knew that Grandpa didn't mean that what he was saying. The truth of it was that he and Indian Tom were very good friends, unless they were making a deal for horses. "Grandpa," I asked, "will you help me pick my pony?" Grandpa frowned. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "The way I look at it, this is your first pony, and I think you should pick the one you want all by yourself. I don't think you should have any help from me or anyone else. This will be something you will always remember. Your first pony. I don't think you should share this with anyone." "All right, Grandpa," I said. "I hope I don't pick the scrubbiest one." "You won't have to worry about that," Grandpa said. "They're both good ponies." I thanked Grandpa, and with Rowdy bouncing along at my side, I walked out to the barn lot. Before I opened the gate, I peeked through a crack and saw 2 of the most beautiful ponies I had ever seen. The ponies had heard us. They were standing with their heads raised and their ears pricked up, looking toward the gate. Horseflies were bothering them. They were stomping their feet and swishing their tails. Right off, I saw that the roan didn't stand as high as the paint. He was chunky and solid. His coat was so glossy it glistened in the sun. "Rowdy," I said in a low voice, "that roan is built for power. He could go all day and night and never get tired." The paint was almost too pretty. She was more white than black and more streamlined than the roan. The dark black patterns looked like they had been painted on her. Her legs were long and slim. She had a perfect head, small and dainty. "Rowdy," I said, "that paint is built for speed. I'll bet she could run like the wind." I opened the gate, walked up close to the ponies, and stopped. What I knew about judging horses you could have put in a snuff can. All I had to go by was what I liked. As far back as I could remember, in every dream I had had of owning my own pony, it had always been a beautiful paint. Not taking my eyes from the paint, I said, "Rowdy, I won't have to look at that roan. I've always made up my mind. I want that paint. That's the pony for me." Rowdy seemed to realize that this was one of the biggest days of my life. He was so happy he was wiggling all over the place. To make the ponies move so I could see how they walked, I stomped my foot, clapped my hands, and shouted, "Hey!" in a loud voice. The roan snorted and bolted to the other side of the lot. The muscles in his legs and shoulders knotted and quivered as he ran. He was a beauty. The paint didn't move from her tracks. She just stood there, with her head up, looking at us. I liked that. I didn't want my pony to be nervous and jumpy. I walked over to her and held out my hand. The paint wasn't the least bit nervous or scared. With her small ears pointing at me, she lowered her head. I felt her hot breath on my fingers as she nuzzled my hand. Then she raised her head and nibbled at the brim of my old straw hat. I noticed that her eyes were light brown, warm, and soft. I almost cried as I laid my face against her head. "I've waited a long, long time for you, little girl," I said. "Now you're mine. I'll always be good to you." I backed up about 10 feet from the paint and snapped my fingers. "Come on, little girl," I said. "I want to see you walk." She came to me willingly, but what I saw hurt me all over. She was limping in her right hind leg. "What's the matter, little girl?" I asked as I walked around to have a look at her leg. "Do you have something in your hoof?" When I knelt down, I saw why the pony was limping. My old heart dropped clear down to the bottom of my stomach. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. In the fetlock, just above the hoof, my beautiful pony had a deep, raw, red wound. Flies and gnats were swarming around it. I jumped back and said, "Oh! Oh no!" Not taking time to open the gate, I flew over the rail fence and ran to the store. "Grandpa!" I shouted as I darted through the door. "That paint pony has a bad cut on its leg." Grandpa looked over his glasses at me. "I know that pony has a cut on its leg," he said. "She got it caught in a barbed wire fence, but it's not as bad as you think. The tendon hasn't been hurt at all. With the right kind of doctoring, that pony will be as good as new in 4 or 5 weeks." 4 or 5 weeks! I exclaimed. "Grandpa, I don't want to wait that long for a pony to ride. I want a pony I can ride right now. I'd like to ride it home." "What about the roan?" Grandpa said. "He's a good pony. He's just as good as the paint, maybe even better." "He sure is a beauty," I said, "but I wanted the paint. I've always wanted a paint pony, but I don't want one that's crippled." "Why don't you have another look at that roan?" Grandpa said. "You might change your mind." "All right," I said, "but I sure wanted that paint." With a heavy heart, I went back to the barn lot to look at the roan gelding. I must have walked around him at least 50 times. I liked everything I saw, but I just couldn't make up my mind. Something seemed to have gone out of my pony wantin'. Every step I took, the paint followed, limping along beside me. Time after time she would push me with her head. She nibbled at my clothes. Once she even nickered. She seemed to be begging me to take her. More disturbed than I'd ever been, I went back to the store to have another talk with Grandpa. "Grandpa," I said, "I like that roan. I like him a lot, but I can't make up my mind. I just wish that paint wasn't crippled." "I'd like to help you," Grandpa said, "but I'm afraid I can't. You'll have to make up your own mind." "Grandpa," I said, "are those the only ponies Indian Tom had to sell?" "No," Grandpa said. "Indian Tom had about 60 head he wanted to sell. All kinds. Horses, mules, ponies, and even a few donkeys." "He did?" I exclaimed. "Then how come you brought that crippled one home? Why didn't you bring one that wasn't a cripple?" "Oh, I don't know," Grandpa said very seriously. "You know, there is a reason behind everything. Maybe I felt sorry for that little mare. I feel sorry for anything that's crippled. Don't you?" "Oh, sure, Grandpa," I said. "I always feel sorry for crippled things. I feel sorry for that little mare. She's so pretty I'd take her in a minute, but I don't want to wait 4 or 5 weeks to ride her." "It's tough for anything to be crippled. Animals, human beings, even little birds," Grandpa said. "You know, a lot of cripples could be helped if someone would just take the time to help them." The way Grandpa kept talking about crippled things started me thinking that he wanted me to take the paint pony. Because I'd have done anything for my grandpa, even if it hurt me. I said, "Grandpa, do you want me to take the paint? If you do, I'll take her even if she is a cripple." "No, no," Grandpa said, shaking his head. "I'm not trying to make up your mind for you. I want you to do that. You pick the pony you want." "I think I'll have another look at them," I said. "I just wish that paint wasn't a cripple. I'd be riding right now." "If you do make up your mind," Grandpa said, "there's a halter hanging on the gatepost." I thanked Grandpa and walked back to the barn lot with Rowdy. I took the halter from the gatepost, opened the gate, and stepped inside. The ponies were standing at the far end of the lot, about 10 feet apart. They were watching us. As I stood there with the halter in my hand, looking from the roan to the paint and from the paint to the roan, I said, "Doggone it, Rowdy, I don't know which pony I want. If I take the roan, I know I'll never forget that little mare. If I take her, I'll have to wait before I can ride her. If I had enough money, I'd just buy both of them." I had about decided to have another talk with Grandpa, when suddenly Rowdy trotted across the barn lot and sat down right in front of the little mare. With his old tail stirring up the dust, he looked up at her. The little mare wasn't the least bit scared of Rowdy. She just stood there looking down at him with her small ears pointing forward. Then, very slowly, she lowered her head and sniffed him. I saw Rowdy's long tongue reach out and lap her nose. She threw up her head and snorted, but didn't move from her tracks. Rowdy's old tail went crazy. I couldn't hear him, but I knew that he was whimpering happily. I could tell by the surprised look on the little mare's face that it was the first time she had been kissed on the nose by a hound dog. She must have liked it because she lowered her head and had another sniff. Rowdy went absolutely crazy. He wiggled and twisted all around the little mare. Once he even pranced under her. The little mare never moved. She just stood there, favoring her crippled leg, swishing her tail, and watching Rowdy's happy actions. All at once, Rowdy left the little mare and came bounding back to me. He almost knocked the breath out of me by rearing up and hit me in the chest with his front paws. I put my arms around my old hound. "Aw, Rowdy," I said. "What did you want to do anything like that for? Are you trying to tell me to take the little mare? She's crippled. Can't you see that? I don't want a crippled pony." I still had my arms around Rowdy and was trying to dodge his lapping tongue when I saw a movement from the corner of my eye. I looked up and saw the little mare come limping across the barn lot. She came right up to me and gave me a push with her head. Up until then, everything that had happened had made my old heart as heavy as lead, but when the little mare gave me that push, it just hauled off and melted. With one arm around my old hound dog and the other arm around the neck of the little mare, I said in a choking voice, "All right, little girl, you win. You've got yourself a home and I've got myself a pony. I think I would have picked you anyway." I could have sworn that she lowered her head to make it easy to put the halter on. I led her out of the barn lot and was tying her to the hitching rail when Grandpa came out of the store. His hands were shoved down in his pockets and he had a serious look on his face. "Is that the pony you want?" he asked. "It sure is, Grandpa," I said. "I've waited this long for a pony to ride. I guess I can wait another 4 or 5 weeks. Grandpa frowned and started digging at his wiry whiskers with his fingers. "I hope you haven't made a mistake," he said. "Sometimes a fellow can do things in too much of a hurry. Later on, he may regret what he's done." "I won't ever regret buying this little mare, Grandpa," I said. "I won't ever regret that." "I hope not," Grandpa said. "Do you think I should have taken the roan?" I asked. "No," Grandpa said. "I didn't mean that at all. I just want you to be sure of what you're doing. I wouldn't want you to be hurt later on." Just then, Grandma came out on the porch of the house. "Jay Barry," she hollered, "is that the pony you're going to buy?" "It sure is, Grandma," I hollered back. "What do you think of her?" "She's a beauty," Grandma said, "but I thought I saw her limping." "She's got a cut on her leg," I said. "Grandpa says it'll be all right in a few weeks." "You let your little sister doctor that crippled leg," Grandma said. "She'll have her well in no time." Before I could say anything, Grandpa said, "By golly, your Grandma's right. Daisy probably knows more about crippled legs than anyone in these hills. She's been walking around on one all her life." "If I know Daisy," I said, "I won't have to ask her to doctor my pony's leg. She'll put on that Red Cross uniform and take over. She always does." "Maybe I should have another look at that leg," Grandpa said. He came over, knelt down, and fingered the cut with his gentle old hands. Clicking his tongue and shaking his head, he said, "That is a nasty cut, but the tendon hasn't been hurt at all. I hate to see anything crippled like that. It's pitiful." On hearing a rumbling noise, I looked down the road and saw a wagon coming. There were 5 Cherokee Indians in it. "Grandpa," I said, "looks like you have some people coming to the store." Grandpa stood up, looked down the road, and said, "That's John Comingdeer and his family." Then Grandpa turned to me and said, "Maybe you should go home and think more about buying this pony. Talk it over with your mother and father and your sister. You might want to change your mind." I couldn't hardly believe what Grandpa was saying. "Change my mind?" I said. "Oh, no, Grandpa, I would never do that. I want this little mare more than anything. I won't ever change my mind about that." "I know how much you want that pony," he said. I went through the same thing when I was a boy. But sometimes a fellow can want something so bad he will overlook things that are more important. When that happens, it can really hurt a fellow. I know. I've had it happen to me." Knowing my old Grandpa as I did, I had the feeling that he was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't figure out what it was. He knew how much I wanted a pony and a 22. "Grandpa," I said, "I couldn't be overlooking anything. Owning my own pony and a 22 are the most important things in my life. That's all I've ever wanted. I don't want anything else." "All right," Grandpa said. "I guess your mind is made up. If a pony is what you want, a pony is what you'll have. You've earned that, right? I won't say any more." Just then the wagon pulled up in front of the store, and the Indians started getting out of it. "Oh, yeah," Grandpa said. "I almost forgot. You'll need a saddle. I know a fellow down the river has a good used one he wants to sell. I think we can get a pretty good buy on it." "I'll take it," I said before I thought. "That is, if I have enough money. If I have to, I can do without that 22 for a while." You won't have to do it without anything, Grandpa said. You have $150, don't you? That's more than enough to get a pony, saddle, and gun. Grandpa, I gave Daisy $6, I said. I just had to. She's always doing things for me. She even fed the monkeys for me. That's all right, Grandpa said. You still have enough, and you should have some left over. I ran my hand down in my pocket, pulled out my money, and handed it to Grandpa. Grandpa, I said, will you take care of my money and pay Indian Tom for the pony? If I have any left after I buy that saddle and gun, I'll give it to Mama. I'll take care of it, he said. Don't worry about a thing. I was untying the halter rope from the hitching rail when Grandpa said, On your way home, I'd take it easy with that mare. Don't walk her too fast. In a few weeks, you'll have one of the finest little ponies in these hills. Grandpa, I said, without you, I don't know what I'd do. I really don't. You're always helping me. Grandpa grinned. That's what grandpas are for, isn't it? He said. I thanked Grandpa, and with my heart singing, I started for home. As I walked along the country road, leading my pony, no boy on earth could have been happier. All my dreams had finally come true. I had my own pony. I couldn't remember a day when the sky looked so clear and blue, or the sunshine so bright. Every bush seemed to have a bird singing its head off. From down in the bottoms, I heard the shrill call of a bobwhite and the clamoring cry of a kingfisher in flight. At the top of an old dead tree close to the road, a mockingbird started singing. I stopped to listen. He mocked every bird in the Ozark Hills, from a red-headed woodpecker to a screaming blue jay. On that walk, my old hound wouldn't get a foot from my side. He never had done that before, and about every 10 feet I would feel his warm tongue lick my hand. He acted like he was jealous of the little mare. I stopped, knelt down, and put my arm around him. "Ah, Rowdy," I said, "you don't have to be jealous of my pony. I'll always love you. You know that. Why, I couldn't live without you." Rowdy was so pleased he went all to pieces. He started running circles around us. He found an old corncob lying by the side of the road and started playing with it, hold it in his mouth and slinging it in his head. He bounded down the road. He dropped the corncob in the middle of the road and started to growl and dig at it. I laughed out loud at his playful actions. As I walked along, I decided I'd try something. I threw the halter rope over my pony's neck and kept walking without looking back. I hadn't gone 20 feet when I heard the clopping of her hooves. She was following me. I was so proud of her, my old heart came close to jumping right through the bib of my overalls. As I neared our farm, I saw Papa plowing way down in one of our fields. He stopped his team, jerked his battered old hat from his head, and waved it at me. I waved back, feeling as proud as I ever had in my life. About 50 yards from our house, I stopped. With my fingers, I combed my pony's mane and straightened out the long hair in her beautiful tail. I rubbed the dust from her coat with my handkerchief. I wanted her to look pretty before Mama and Daisy saw her. Just as I took hold of the halter rope to be on my way again, I heard Daisy humming. She was in her playhouse up on the hillside. I wasn't too surprised when she started singing. I stopped and listened. She was singing my favorite song, a song I had heard my mother sing many, many times, "The Old Master Painter from the Faraway Hills." As I stood there listening to her clear voice ring out over the valley, I happened to glance down to the raw, red wound on my pony's leg. Like a bolt of lightning, it hit me. I knew then what my old grandpa had been trying to tell me. I was so shook up I dropped the halter rope. Closing my eyes and shaking my head, I said, "Oh, Grandpa, how could I have been so dumb? Dear God, how could I have been so stupid?" In a daze, I stumbled to the side of the road. I sat down on a rock and buried my face in my arms. I remembered everything my old grandpa had said, from the time I got to the store until I left. "Don't be in too big a hurry about buying this pony. Talk it over with your mother and father. Be sure of what you are doing. I don't want you to do something you'll be sorry for later on." Browdy must have sensed that something was wrong. He came to me and tried to push his head up under my arms so he could lick my face. I put my arms around him. In a voice choked with emotion, I said, "Rowdy, I can't buy this pony. I just can't. If I did buy her, I could never ride her. Every time I got on her back, I'd think of my little sister and that old crippled leg of hers. That's what Grandpa was trying to tell me. He wanted me to give the pony to her so she could go to the hospital and get it straightened out. How could I have been so dumb? I guess I just couldn't think of anything but the pony." I got up, took the halter rope in my hand, and started back to the store. I saw Papa stop his plowing. He didn't wave his hat at me that time. He just stood with his hands on the plow handles, watching me as I walked back up the road. That was a long, long walk for me. The longest walk I had ever taken in my life. I didn't see any blue sky or hear any birds singing. My mind was numb. I couldn't think. I felt like I was lost in a deep, dark timber and didn't know which way to go or what to do. As I came inside of the store, I saw my old grandpa sitting on his rocker in the porch. As usual, he was just sitting there, looking off across the country, with a fly swatter in his hand and rocking away. With my head bowed, and not even looking at him, I walked by within 10 feet of him. He never said a word. I didn't either. When I heard the squeaking of his old rocker stop, I knew he was watching me. I opened the gate, led my little mare into the barn lot, and took the halter from her head. With tears in my eyes, I patted her on the neck and said, "Goodbye, little girl. I guess we can't have everything we'd like to have. We have to give up a few things now and then. I'll never forget you, and I'll always love you." I was hanging the halter on the gate post when something way down inside me busted wide open. Placing my hands on the post, I buried my face in my arms and cried. If teardrops could have made a fence post sprout roots and grow, that post would have grown 20 feet tall. After I had had a good cry, I felt a little better, but not very much. With my handkerchief, I dried my face the best I could, walked over and sat down on the porch by my grandpa. He was just sitting there, with a pleased look on his friendly old face, rocking away. Neither of us said a word. I thought that the slow squeaking of Grandpa's old rocker was going to make me bawl again. It would have, too, if Grandpa hadn't started talking. He coughed and squirmed around in his chair. In a low, soft voice, he said, "What's the matter? Have you changed your mind? You going to take the roan this time?" "I'm not going to take either one of those ponies, Grandpa," I said. "I can't." "Neither one of them?" Grandpa said. "I don't understand. What happened?" "I can't buy a pony, Grandpa," I said. "If I do, I'd always feel guilty. Every time I climbed on his back to go riding, I'd think of my little sister and that old crippled leg of hers. I'm going to give my money to her so she can go to the hospital and get it fixed up." "I think you were trying to tell me that all the time. That's why you brought the crippled mare home with you, so I could see it, and maybe it would wake me up. But I was so blind I couldn't see anything but the pony." Not saying a word, Grandpa ran his hand down in his pocket, pulled out the money I'd given him, and handed it to me. In a voice that quivered with emotion, he said, "Son, I've always been proud of you, but right now, no grandpa on this earth could be as proud as I am, though I'm not very proud of myself." "Why, Grandpa?" I said. "You haven't done anything." "Oh, I don't know," he said. "I think there's a passage in the Bible that could explain it better than I could, where it says, 'O ye of little faith.'" On hearing a door slam, I turned and saw Grandma coming over from the house. She was carrying a small cloth sack in her hand. She walked up to us. Holding the sack out to me, she said, "Hey, here, J. Barry. Take this to your mother." "What is it, Grandma?" I asked as I took the sack. "It's the money your grandpa and I have been saving for Daisy's doctor bill," she said. "That's what you're going to do with your money, isn't it?" "Sure, Grandma," I said, very surprised. "But how did you know?" Grandma smiled and said, "Oh, I knew. Us old grandmas know a lot more than you boys give us credit for." "Aw, Grandma," I said, "I should have known. You always could read my mind." "I say," Grandpa said, all excited, "I just thought of something. Your grandma's been wanting to go to town. Tomorrow's a good day for it. Now, if you and your father can come up and take care of the store for me, your mother and Daisy could ride in with us. The train that runs from Tahlequah to Oklahoma City doesn't leave until the middle of the afternoon. We'd get them there in plenty of time to catch it." "I'll tell Mama as quick as I get home," I said. "It's getting late," Grandma said. "You'd better be on your way. Tell your mother if she wants to ride in with us to be ready first thing in the morning." I thanked Grandma and Grandpa and lit out for home. Mama, Papa, and Daisy were just sitting down at the supper table when I came flying into the house. I walked up to Mama, handed her the sack of money, and said, "Here, Mama, this is for you." "What is it?" Mama asked. "It's the money I got for catching the monkeys, and all that Grandpa and Grandma have saved. We want you to have it so you can take Daisy to the hospital and get her crippled leg fixed." I saw Mama's face slowly turning grayish-white. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked at the sack, and then across the table at Daisy. She looked again at the sack, and then at Papa. It was so still in our kitchen you could have heard a dream walking. The only sound I heard was the slow hissing of the tea kettle on the cook stove. Mama closed her eyes. I saw the tears when they squeezed out of her eyes and ran slowly down her cheeks. In a low whisper, Mama said, "Oh, thank you, dear Lord. Oh, thank you. I'll be forever grateful." Daisy went over to Mama and put her arms around her. She started crying. Something that felt like a big old wasp's nest got all wadded up in my throat, and darned if I didn't bawl a little too. Papa got up from the table and walked into the front room. When he came back, he had what little money he and Mama had saved. Daisy hurried to her room and got her money. I never saw so much money. There was money all over the place. "Papa," I said, "Grandpa and Grandma are going into town tomorrow. He said if you and I would take care of the store, Mama and Daisy could ride in with them and catch the train." Papa looked at Mama and said, "As long as we have waited for this day, I can't see any reason to put it off. What do you think?" "What do I think?" Mama said, all excited. "Why, I'd go this very minute if I could." "Then start packing," Papa said. "Don't worry about Jayberry and me. We'll make out all right." Mama and Daisy were off in another room packing their clothes when Papa said in a low voice, "Son, I wanted to say this before, but I didn't want your mother and Daisy to hear. I didn't want them to know that you had almost gotten home with your pony. You grew 10 feet tall today. I'm proud of you. I'd like to shake your hand." I shook hands with Papa for the first time in my life. It felt like all his strength came right up my arm and spread through my body.